I feel like the world is ready for this now. I feel like people are really wanting to make the most out of life at the moment. It's just critically important that you live your best life. Live your life, not someone else's life. What people will wish to get back to is more joy, more purpose, spending time with people that they love. And I think that comes down to understanding the people that you are spending time with.
Welcome on the Joyful Mate podcast. How are you, Nina?
I'm well, Anthony. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited
really
to have you.
Grateful to be here.
Yeah, and equally, I'm excited to have you on and really learn more from you in terms of your expertise to help the listener get up to speed with your expertise. Please share your journey story as to how you've arrived at doing the work you do today.
Okay, there's quite a few stories that have brought me to the work that I do today. In my previous corporate world, part of my role was really to manage people, but to motivate people to do well in what they were doing, because like most managers, my results depended on my team. And as my team got bigger, and then I had to really think about how I was going to get the best out of my team. And how I did that wasn't simple. At one point, HR came to me and said, "How have you got the time to do this?" And I said, "I haven't got the time not to do this." And this was knowing every person in my team and understanding what they were there for. And for me, once I understood that, I could bring the team together and get the team to work cohesively together. The second story that brought me to my business is I had a very serious bone cancer quite a few years ago, which I've just finished the manuscript, and there is a book about my story, and that took me out of corporate life. And from that, I thought about what was it in my role that I enjoyed most, and it was in developing others. So I've created a business called The Gold Room.
Amazing. I really love that story and how you've arrived at, your purpose essentially.
Yeah, it is.
And I really liked how it was a journey, because you were helping others find their connection with the work they do. And if they have meaning behind the work they do it really well. And I guess those years really shaped you for what you're doing today and helped you discover what your calling was in life. And this podcast is very much helping others go on their journey. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation around how you really helped these people in, your team engage with the work they're doing, because most of the listeners have a job, some type of job or something they're doing. And in order to do that sustainably well, we need to have meaning behind what we're doing. And often the meaning's there, but we lose track of it or lose sight of it. And I think COVID was one of those big disrupting factors. It either was a catalyst for people finding a more meaningful job, or a catalyst to think, I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, and they've lost connection with why they joined and all that sort of stuff. So really keen to have this first conversation around how you helped how you help people today really find that connection with what they do and discover their purpose.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you some statistics. And when I had a very successful team in a particular company, and because I had a successful team, when you do something really well, then all of a sudden you're given a challenge. So I was given a team that wasn't performing, and there were many reasons for that. So it took that team were at 44% to target, and my team were making bonuses and above target. And I thought, I can't bring in to my meetings the previous team that were pumping the sky and like everything was working for them, and the other team dragging their legs, just hating to be there. So I changed strategy, and I had very in-depth one-on-ones with everybody within my team. And I found out what their why was, why they were doing that job, and why they were doing their job, and what they wanted life to look like in 5 years. And we all know about the 5-year plan. And from that, I worked out with each individual how this role could become part of their own success. And from that, and there's a whole lot of things behind the strategy that I did. I was able to, unpack the way that I set people's KPIs and that sort of thing is a whole, another piece to the management piece. But I was able to turn that team around from 44% to target to 136% to target. And if there's managers listening and managers in this call, that's significant. And my managers and HR had a lot of questions about how you did this. All I did was understand what was important to them. And for me, and especially as I shared with you, I had an illness. I had a very serious illness to overcome. We will spend more than 90,000 hours at work in our lifetime. And something that I find very interesting is when people talk about work-life balance, when a majority of your time will be spent in that workspace. So why can't we make that work for us as well as for the organizations that we work for?
That's a very good point you make there. And I think the other part is also understanding that, because I think a lot of people think, I shouldn't have to work, or they don't understand the importance of working, because until you talk to retirees that, thinking that when they were working, all they wanted to do was retire. Finally, they retire and they're thinking, I'm so lost. I've got no purpose. I've got nothing to do. Or if I want to do something, everyone else is doing something else, or they were still working. And so I think we have this fantasy about retirement, and also we're very delusional and resistant around work. And so I guess I'm really keen to explore these conversations you had and what sort of questionings helped bring out what was important to because often when people, well, certainly when they first ask this question, they may say what was important to their parents that have been projected onto them. So their parents have said, you got to go to school, get good marks, go to uni, get good grades, get a good job, and, buy a house and all that sort of stuff. And so they think, oh, that's important, right? That's it, but it's been instilled into them.
Yeah.
It's not in that, it's not coming from within. So how do you help someone really find that it's a internal driver as exposed to an external driver?
Okay. This comes down to some of the tools that I use, Anthony, and some of these things I used in my corporate life, and some of these things I actually learned when I left corporate life. And you're exactly right. The thing that when people retire, they're immediately somebody, and then all of a sudden that is taken away. Then it feels like, and I know what this feels like because I had to leave corporate life. I had to leave my job. It feels like you are stripped away because your purpose, it's like, what do I do? What was so important to me that I got up every morning and focused on that thing? What kept me up? What woke me up at 3:00 in the morning? Even if it was frustrating, it felt like you were part of something. And something that I've written about in my book was being so connected to the title on my business card. And I think that's what people notice when they retire, that hi, I'm Nina, I am, all of a sudden the I am is, left to, that's the mystery. Oh, who am I without this? Something I work with people, because as I said, I don't really believe in work-life balance, is your why. And how we find your why, I do a lot of work with values. And sometimes people have not stopped to think about what their values are. And when they unpack their values and then they look at what they're doing, sometimes the why becomes very clear. And sometimes there is a question mark about this does not align with my values. So that's when the question comes up that, as you said, like your parents said, work hard. Your parents said, get this degree. Your parents suggested this was good and you were 17 years old. And that's when often there's a little bit of soul searching and some coaching comes into that space. And that's a good thing. But it's also the why can be connected to what they do.
And in terms of this work around values, what sort of process or what are some of the things that the listener can start thinking about now in terms of discovering their values?
Okay, I use a process, but there's many processes for values. I've actually created a values card pack where you go through all the values, pick your top 10, then pick your top 5 values. There's lots of things online. There's lists of values. And for instance, and some values might be very close. For instance, wealth and then money, or honesty and compliance sometimes. And then there's a little discussion about what does that word mean to you and what does that word mean to you? The words are important. They're very important. And we take it down to top 10 and then the top 5. And then it's like, are you living with those values? An example is when I was really well, I was in hospital for a long time. And previous to that, I used to run on the treadmill when I had half an hour at work, and I ate really healthily. I still think I do. And a value was health. And health to me was exercising and eating well and all of those things that we talk about. Then all of a sudden, health meant fighting for my life. So it was a different thing. And health then meant accepting a whole process of actually, I went through a lot of chemotherapy, radiotherapy. So putting things into my body that weren't healthy to survive. But I was still able to make sense of that because health was still a value. It just represented a different process.
And in order, so I think, that's so important that we understand our values. And when we're living by our values, we're authentic, right?
Yes.
But first of all, you got to know your values and then live them out and to embrace this authenticity about you. So is there a process there in terms of, okay, you've, found your top 5 values, is your work aligned, or, finding that alignment with the work you're currently doing, finding that you're living authentically to those values outside of work, inside of work, and obviously prioritizing that you're doing your values, because when you do your values, you feel purposeful and that creates that meaning to life. So what's that? Is there a stage process, once you find those values, to then help them integrate them or help them find connection with it, where they're actually doing it and to do more of it?
Yeah. I think, as I said, because I think exploring your values and what's important to you is I think it's critical. When someone does that, there's often a wake-up call. And I'll give you an example. And all of my client conversations are, of course, confidential, but this is an example. A client was working really long hours and we went through values, and this person was extremely stressed, and a little bit about what you were saying, Anthony, like almost resenting the job and what the job was taking. So we went through values, and his top value was family. And that was a wake up call, because And this is where coaching helps, because in coaching, you actually often hold up the mirror to the person. And it was like, wait a minute, my top value is family, and I don't even have time to talk to them. And he realized, he said, in my mind, I'm working for my family, and it's all about giving my family this and giving my family that. And he said, but I walk in exhausted. I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk through dinner. I'm not doing the things. I'm not contributing to the family that I'm working for. And then a conversation is, okay, how do we do this differently? How do we do this differently? And sometimes it feels like it can be like in that example, that person does take 30 minutes in the morning to have breakfast with his kids. He does does sit with the family and have dinner and have conversation, and know that that's going to be 45 minutes and it's important. But sometimes it's just realizing, and maybe even that's when the communication comes down to working the work and communicating why you're doing that, like having that communication with the family, that this is about us, not just me. So it can be a wake-up call. Another one is health. I've had people that have got health, and then because they're sort of so committed to what they're doing in their day job, they forget and give up on going to the gym, or give up on taking the run, or give up on taking the dog for a walk. So it's a mirror. And I think it does help to have the conversation through that process.
Absolutely. I can imagine it was a light bulb moment
Yeah.
for that. Yeah, for that person. Really keen now, because you touched on that communication piece, is that, okay, I'm doing all this hard work, but it, my partner may think I'm just prioritize work over family, but but there's a reason, I'm working hard is to support the family and to ensure, the family's well supported, and having that conversation around that. And I think this is the big thing around authenticity, is having the confidence to speak up and voice your values, right? And voice what you're, and yeah. So how do you support people to have these, it can be difficult conversations, and whether it be with an employer or a manager to an employee, or whether it's spouse, yeah, these difficult conversations in order to voice your authenticity.
Okay. With communication, when we're changing our communication to get clearer about something to another or others, having language and tools around that piece is really important. I'm glad that you've brought up work and personal life, because I see it as one. It's your life. But for instance, with managers of people, and I work with emerging leaders, is my niche market. I have a 14-step communication process for the managers to start to change the way they're communicating and connecting with their employees. And that is a 14-step coaching process. I mean, I give this out. I give it out to organizations, but it is, to unpack it really well is part of the coaching process. Now, in that 14 steps, the managers start to understand their own why. They start to understand their own values. And I also unpack strengths with them, so they understand their lens as how they come to any situation. We all come from our own lens. It's our background, it's our experience, it's our education, it's what our parents expected of us. It's all part of the lens that we come to. And where communication breaks down in teams is when we expect others to come to a situation with our lens. So knowing yourself is the first step in leadership and management. It's the same at home. And as I said, when a light bulb goes off and it's like, I've been approaching life this way. And that's really interesting because it's for my family and that has taken me away from my family. It's good for everybody to communicate and to understand their values and their why. So there's a very easy, as I said, there's an easy process. And sometimes especially when I use my process, I will say to somebody that's got a partner or family, take this home and use it with your family. And it opens up very honest and in-depth conversations that may not otherwise have happened. And with my 14-step process, I talk to managers about recognizing their staff. I talk to them about knowing their staff. I do have team building sessions where we can unpack that and get to know everybody. But it's really important. And I go back to potentially the 90,000 hours that you might spend at work. And you'll spend more time with the people that you work with sometimes than your own family. I mean, COVID did change that for us, but even that was challenging because people were spending all day with people that they hadn't spent all day with previously. So getting to know yourself first is the big step, and then understanding others.
Love it. That know thyself.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It comes up.
Shakespeare was a wise man, right?
Totally. It just comes up in so many conversations I have is really get to know yourself. And I think through that, the way we perceive the world is through comparison and contrast. And I think we can get lost in that, in that perception of, who we are essentially. And we get carried away with trying to be someone else most of the time because we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. And it's, we just essentially get so fractured, and loss of self is a big thing. And what you're essentially saying is really, spend the time to get to know thyself in order to better understand others.
I call it the pinstripe suit strategy. I've played that game. You put on the suit and you go to work as that person. Yeah. So very important to know yourself.
Absolutely. I really, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in a lot of areas in terms of, purpose, values, meaning, communication, leadership, and there's so much more you can offer the listeners and viewers. How can they best connect with you, Nina?
Okay. My business is the Gold Room. So Nina at thegoldroom.com.au.
Fantastic.
Or, yeah.
Yeah. Anything? Yeah. You want to share more?
I find that the world now, I was in a group of people last night and we were having this conversation, and I suppose I hang out with a lot of self-development people, and I'm a self-development nerd, I think, but I feel like, and maybe it's COVID but I feel like the world is ready for this now. I feel like people are really wanting to make the most out of life at the moment. And I guess like in my book that hopefully will come out this year, that's the plan. I think, to have a health scare and it makes you sort of stop and think, what is life all about? And I've written a book to share that. So somebody that hasn't gone through that process can use my experience. And I just can't, it's just critically important that you live your best life. And I think this is what this work is about. When I go into organizations and I'm lucky enough to stand in front of a whole team of people, I think just leaving that behind, that nugget behind, is live your life, not someone else's life. And when you talk about joy, it's just, it's so important. And I think, that I did spend a lot of time in hospital, and and you see people, and nobody is wishing that when things are really critical, nobody is wishing that they spent more time trying to get that next promotion or more time trying to get more money. What they'll what people will wish to get back to is more joy, more purpose, spending time with people that they love. And I think that comes down to understanding the people that you are spending time with.
And in order to do that, we must understand ourselves first, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great words of wisdom there that you shared at the conclusion of the episode. So leaves the listeners a lot to think about around, well, in order to live your best life, you need to understand yourself and then project that outwards. That, requires that inner work with you and exploring the gold room. So listeners and viewers, please go to the link, thegoldroom.com, and connect with Nina and her great work. And Nina, I just really wanted to say thank you for putting aside the time and really assisting the listeners and viewers on their journey to finding more purpose, meaning, fulfillment, and happiness.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for listening.
And to the listeners and viewers, please share it with others that you believe could benefit from hearing Nina's wisdom. So please share it far and wide, and appreciate you showing up each week to the Joyful Mate podcast.